Welcome to the webinar to win. We're thrilled to have with us today Nate Gibby. We've really enjoyed our association with Nate Gibby and Serfwerks in the past. Nate has been one of our rock star presenters at SMARTcon. And of course, we've got SMARTcon coming up in September again. Kim, you might want to jump in with the date. Tell them about the date. Let's make sure you've got hold the date, and you can actually go register for SMARTcon now. You won't even have to use your credit card, and you'll get your best early bird pricing. So you're going to love what Nate Gibby has to share today. Nate Gibby is a co-founder and CEO at Serfwerks, and has just been a favorite at SMARTcon. You're going to love him as he's going to talk about some key pitfalls of wrestling with marketing, and he's just a terrific expert. So Nate, I'm going to just let you dive in here and teach us about these top 3 marketing pitfalls. And really, Nate's going to help you to not only know what those pitfalls are, but what you can do to avoid those pitfalls and come away with some great action items that will empower your marketing and your marketing engine. So Nate, I'm going to just let you dive in here. And Kim, I think if you can anticipate where Nate's going with the slides, that'll be great.
Well, thank you very much, Scott. Thank you all for joining us. We look forward to having a great conversation today and providing you with some good information that will help you market your message, your organization, your product, your service, whatever it is, more effectively. Let's start off by establishing the assumption that everyone has some idea, concept, product, or service that they need to sell, and that the marketing process is simply the means by which we try to communicate that message or get an idea across, sometimes to build awareness, most importantly, to compel action. And so over the past 20 years of my career, I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of companies of all shapes and sizes, varying industries, and these pitfalls we're going to talk about here in a few minutes are a compilation of not only that experience, but also a lot of the market research where we've done research among several hundred companies to understand their marketing practices. And having compiled all of this information over the years, we hope to disseminate that to you in a palatable form within the next hour. And these top 3 marketing pitfalls are companies tend to, 1, put tools before the strategy. 2, there is frequently no such thing as marketing accountability. And then 3, what we like to call unbounded creativity. And so during our time together today, we're going to elaborate on what each of these items are. We'll give you some specific examples. And then lest I be the guy who complains about a lot of things without doing anything about it, toward the end we'll also give you some solutions as to how to avoid these, and at the end of the day improve the results that you get out of your marketing efforts. So with that being said, let's jump into problem number 1, which is tools before strategy. And if you think about your marketing process, too often organizations, individuals confuse marketing tools for strategy, which would be the equivalent of going to Home Depot and asking for buying a hammer when you're trying to build a house or even a garage or a deck without a plan. We see this almost ubiquitously, from the guy working out of his garage trying to start up a company, all the way to our largest client is a $500 million plus construction company that do the same thing. And what this means, and if you don't mind going to the next slide, is that people have, again, a message, an idea, a product, or a service that they're trying to get across, and the first thought that comes to their head is, okay, I need a website to do that. When we're talking about tools, we're talking about, as we've got on this slide, websites websites, brochures, signage, advertising, social media. There are more. This is intended to be a comprehensive list, but at least gives you an idea as to what a tool is. The strategy is different than that. Strategy is your plan, and it involves several components similar to what we've got listed here on the slide, where it takes into consideration your audience, your positioning, your messaging, your media mix, meaning website versus advertising versus print versus direct marketing or PR, as well as your 4 Ps, which are your product placement, promotion, etc. Your strategy, keep in mind, is your plan to affect your audience in a way that either changes the way that they think about you or compels action. And for businesses, particularly small to medium-sized businesses, it's crucial that you think about what your strategy is. 4 years ago, we did a research project among dentists in the Boise area in which we interviewed 50 general dentists and a handful of dental specialists and asked them about their marketing strategy. And when we asked them about what their marketing strategy was, they all said, yes, we have one. It entails yellow page advertising, some online advertising, and I have a website. Again, these are not strategies, they're just tools, and it's very easy to get thinking in that mindset. Again, like I said earlier, if you have some important message that you need to communicate, and virtually every organization does, it's so easy to say, just throw up a website and say, okay, I need this tool. But if you do that sort of thinking, there are several problems that can arise, which we have on the slide here, if we can go to the next one, where, first of all, let's skip this one and go to the next slide as well, if you might. But what happens is, we like to call it a content void. This is where you know you need to use a tool, but you have no idea how you need to communicate your message. For example, several years ago, I had a client that was doing medical billing for physicians, and they had been in business for 25-something years, and they had acquired a level of success, which was great for them. Their marketing materials all consisted of features lists that their software would do. And curious enough, we started to do some research among their audience and found out that they had a very specific niche that they served best, which was physicians who had been in business at least 5 years and had problems with their prior billing system. They were primarily concerned about customer service. They had been burned by their previous software using their billing. It didn't do exactly what they needed to do. Consequently, they were more willing to pay more money to get a software that provided better customer service, that was more flexible. And this is the niche that my client happened to fill. Now you can see, if you're sitting around saying, okay, we need to have a brochure, and what do we put on it? Well, let's put a list of features of our software. And your customer is concerned about customer service. Not only can you see that you have a content void where you're not talking about customer service, but you're also, as per the second column there, very misaligned with what your audience is primarily concerned, which is the second problem. Moving on to the third, this also can result in you following blind trends. For example, social media is big. In fact, if you joined us early in the podcast, you saw the slide that said that social media is not a cure-all. I have a client that, like I said, is a $500 million plus construction company, and in their board of directors meeting, one of their directors said, we need to really get on Facebook. Well, Facebook can be great for particular situations. For their company, they were selling to government and municipalities to build highways and dams. Facebook is not likely to be a very good tool for them to use to engage that audience. There could be other social platforms, and you could have an argument for that. But because it's so trendy, and this was 5 or 6 years ago, and course, you're seeing Facebook everywhere. They just thought, well, we need to get on it because everybody else is doing it. Now, the problem is if you fall victim to putting your tools before strategy, the most important thing is that there are opportunities that go missed. Competitors can steal market share from you. You can fail upselling or cross-selling to customers because you're just not speaking their language. So as you approach your marketing efforts, look for this tendency to try to put your tools before strategy. It's a very easy one to slip into simply because the tools are so readily accessible. But if you can identify it, then you can start to take measures where you say, all right, I've got to make sure that I have a strategy to drive the usage of this tool. We'll get into how to do that later. But the short of it is, if you can think strategically first, you can be far more effective in how you actually implement that tool. You know what sort of content you need to put in your website or your brochure. You can understand the messaging that you need to communicate in any of your correspondence with your various audiences. So keep in mind this tools versus strategy, what each one is. Make sure you have a strategy to drive your tools. Again, we'll get into how to do that here in a few minutes. That being said, let's move on to our next item. If we might switch to the next slide. Actually, sorry, let me just say one last thing about tools before strategy. Here's another problem. Sorry for jumping around, but here's one last problem that we see frequently if someone puts their tools before strategy, and that's this notion of what we like to call touch point differentiation. And what that means is that every touch point that an audience has with your brand or your company has a slightly different appearance, which is very easy to fall into. What I've got here is 3 examples from a company we worked with several years ago where they had a logo, and there's an argument to say that there's some similarity between their logo and that trade show booth. But at that same trade show that they were attending, they were also giving away this flyer that, as you can see, looks entirely different. Part of the problem here is if you look at how a lot of trade shows will work, people are engaging with sometimes hundreds of different vendors. And so you're competing for top of mind awareness. You want to make sure that they understand or remember your product. And when your materials don't line up, or you have this problem of touch point differentiation as I'm describing, you miss these key opportunities to create brand awareness, because you can see this flyer looks like it's from an entirely different company than the trade show booth. Let's move on to the next slide, if we might. And let's get into this problem of marketing accountability. Is it really a thing? Now, as a marketer who's worked for several different agencies over the years, as well as an internal marketing department, it was a rude awakening when all of a sudden I realized that I just didn't have a blank check, or my clients didn't have a blank check just to keep paying me to do whatever I wanted to do for them. Instead, we needed to have some semblance of accountability for our marketing efforts. A lot of times it's difficult to measure your marketing for several reasons. One is not having a method to gauge it or not knowing how. Some of these are difficult to measure. For example, if you were to develop out a new brochure and send that out, or give that to people, how do you really measure the impact that that makes? Sometimes you find that marketers have differing notions of marketing success, which could be, for example, I'm working with a program right now that's trying to get high school kids to take a particular pathway program that will lead them into a career in the life sciences industry. The members of the marketing committee who oversee the marketing expenditures as well as the marketing efforts have very differing notions among themselves as to what marketing success looks like. Some of them think, well, so long as we get a few things out to the public, then we are successful at marketing. Others on the committee look at this and say, if we get more students enrolled in the program, which is actually far more easier to measure metric than simply building awareness, but you can see that this creates problems if somebody like me goes in and wants to justify what I'm doing and prove that I'm having an impact on the goals of that organization. Furthermore, there's, on the next slide, we've got a quote that I think rings true in many respects, that a lot of times marketers can be like neighborhood junkies, where they can't always account for past handouts that they've received. They simply want more money. But those days, as per this quote, came out of Business Week several years ago by Diane and Kylie, those days are being replaced by measurement and accountability. I would argue that if we were to hold our financial planners to the same standard to which we hold marketers, it would be a very different environment, because if your financial planners came to you and said, thank you for letting me spend your portfolio, it's all gone, can't really tell you where it went, but we had a great time when we group built some awareness, you would not likely be very enthusiastic to keep spending your money with that particular individual. However, as marketers, we tend to do that all the time. Yes, it becomes difficult, but if we go to the next slide, you'll see that there's a group out of Boston that surveyed 400 companies in 2008 or 2009 called CMG and Chadwick Martin Bailey. And of those 400 companies, they found that only 25% of them actually thought they did a decent job at measuring their marketing performance. Yet, of those 25% that measured their marketing performance, 98% were gaining market share in a down economy. Now, when you think about this particular stat, it seems obvious, but short of it is you tend to improve that which you measure, and by not only measuring their marketing performance, companies can learn key things that impact their future marketing efforts. By going through that learning process, you can communicate more effectively with your audience, hence driving marketing results. And ultimately, as demonstrated by this slide, you can gain market share simply by measuring your marketing performance. Now, of course, there's some challenges in doing that, but we'll get into how to set up your system to be able to measure your marketing performance here in a few minutes. That being said, let's move on to our third problem, which is one of the things that I think is fun to talk about, geeking out about my profession, but that's what we like to call unbounded creativity. And unbounded creativity occurs when we approach the marketing function in a way where we just try to come up with what we believe are good or creative or even cool ideas. And there are a lot of great and creative ideas out there. That's not to bash any creativity by any stretch. But what it is to say is that creativity can quickly get out of hand and should be guided by not only your strategy, but then your findings from your marketing performance analysis. So if we look at this next slide, I'll show you an example of what I'm talking about. Let's go to the next one, if we might. This is an ad that won a student award out of Florida several years ago. That is an attempt to promote dental floss. And you can see we've got a scary looking clown with a chainsaw that's supposed to be a dentist, and he's got mouths and teeth hanging around him. And despite the fact it's slightly disturbing, there is most certainly some creative merit here, and you could see why this won a creative award. But there's also a very big problem with it, and that's that you have dentists who are your primary advocates of your product, and if Oral-B or Gum or whomever it is whose dental floss this is advertising were to do this, they would upset those people who are the the thought leaders within their industry who are actually advocating that people use their product. So despite the fact it has some creative merit, very problematic when it comes to trying to improve your marketing performance using the people who are the thought leaders who are actually advocating your product. Not a good idea to offend them. Let's look at the next example, if we might, on the next slide. This next one came from an event 10 or so years ago that was put on by the American Institute of Graphic Artists. And again, very creative, very cool. This was a poster that was promoting their monthly event that the organization put on. I believe this one was to try to promote a poster award show. And when you unfolded the poster, and unfortunately you can't see the thing in full size, you just see a picture here on the slide. But what that black area around the middle has that you cannot see very well are a bunch of letters, and there was a code that you were supposed to follow to be able to decipher those letters to give you the location of the event. Short of it is you had to decode the poster to be able to know even where the event was being held. There's no question about it that this is creative, and it's actually a fun poster to look at. But the problem with this is it's so trying to be so creative that it's really becomes problematic when you have to spend time engaging your audience just to figure out a location. And if we were to give them the benefit of the doubt, we'd say that these people are so engaged that they will actually go through it, and there's an argument to be made that it actually engages them in a process that is beneficial in some respects. But the other side of that coin, the point that I'm trying to make with this, is that you're asking them to do a lot just to attend an event. If Griffin Hill were to send out the invitation to today's webinar and put a code that you had to spend at least 5, if not 10 minutes deciphering just to get to the URL to sign up, we may have missed out on a lot of you today. Again, a good example of what I'm referring to as unbounded creativity, which you may not be the creative type and you may not be actually designing things, but it's a problem that anyone who's overseeing the marketing function of their business should be aware of, because even hiring outside people, agencies such as mine, you've got to watch out for this issue, because we can come up with loads of creative ideas, but they might be very misaligned. So I'll give you another example. Several years ago, I was working for another agency, and we were hired by a company who sold gumball machines as a small business opportunity. So the short of it is, they were trying to get you to go out and buy a dozen gumball machines, put them in different locations throughout your city, and go around and make a few extra dollars by collecting the revenue generated in these gumball machines. They came to us and wanted to design an ad that would go in one of these magazines that you see about home-based business opportunities that you can get for free at a grocery store. And the magazines are chock full of ads of fistful of cash and starbursts and lots of text and bullet points and things that, as an advertising person, I would look at and it would make me vomit. So when they came to us and said, we need to design a new ad, one that will stand out, what we did is we went and designed a beautiful ad that had an empty hammock on an empty beach, and the headline said, "Lifestyle Bot brought to you by this company," and then small in the corner was a little gumball machine that you would miss if you didn't look closely. And it was there's a lot of white space, a beautiful picture, very engaging, and it was by far the most attractive ad that would run in that magazine. They ran the ad for 1 month, and their sales absolutely tanked. It was so bad that they immediately pulled the ad for the next month, didn't even give it a second shot, and went back to their previous ad. And of course, that left us scratching our heads, wondering how in the world could we have designed an ad that was so beautiful that performed so poorly? Because it was by far, from at least a creative standpoint, the most creative, most visually aesthetic ad in that magazine. And what it turned out to be is that we simply overthought our audience, that we wanted to communicate this lifestyle that they were going for. But really, these people, all they wanted to see was a fistful of cash. to support whatever they were trying to do by earning some extra money, whether that be a hobby or putting their kids into school, doing whatever they were doing. They didn't care about these lifestyle issues. As such, it had severe consequences on our client by not being aligned with where our what our target audience was, and simply trying to do something cool, pretty, and creative. Now, let's shift gears as we're now approximately halfway through our time, and let's start to, now that we've broken down the tools versus the strategy, we talked about the lack of marketing accountability, and then we've also talked about this notion of unbounded creativity. And let's shift gears slightly, and let's talk about, now that we're aware of these solutions, how do we actually solve them? And anyone from the guy working out of his garage to a very large multi-million or even billion-dollar company can implement some of these strategies to be able to help them be more effective. And so, as such, I give you as a solution the measure, create, affect methodology, which is 3 key points as you think about the marketing function of your business and how you're going to communicate your vitally important ideas that ensures the success of your organization. But think about these simple terms in terms of measure, create, and affect. And let's start with measure, if we might. And what we're talking about here is to try to get a baseline indication as to what's going on within your business. And it starts by developing what we like to call as your key performance indicators. These key performance indicators are the items or the things that you can measure that dictate whether or not your organization is successful. And they could be something like revenue. We could start with top line revenue. Here's how much money we bring in every month. But you don't stop with whatever that top one is. If it's something as broad as top line revenue is always comprised of various other items or subcomponents that contribute to it. For example, several years ago, we were consulting with a hair salon in downtown Salt Lake, and they came to us and said, we want to grow our business. How do we do it? And if you were to put on your marketing hats for a second and try to answer that question for a hair salon, what do? You could grow it one of many different ways, every way from saying, let's buy some advertising in a local magazine that has to deal with fashion and style, to let's do this online, or let's hit zip codes, or let's go to certain bridal shows. There are loads of things that you could do. But what we started out doing is, rather than just saying, oh, let's come up with a bunch of ideas that could be successful, saying, let's look at your numbers and let's break them down into their subcomponents. And so what we did is we looked at top line revenue, and top line revenue is then comprised, at least in the hair salon example, of product versus service revenue, meaning that they sell shampoos and conditioners and makeup, but they also do haircuts, and they do styling, and they do colors and nails and whatnot. And so when we looked at that second tier of key performance indicators, we found that their product revenue was woefully lacking. And it's simply a proportion of here's what our top line revenue, here's the percentage of service versus here's the percentage of product revenue. Of course, product revenue is easy for them because they don't have to work extra to get that money. It's not like if a woman were to come and sit down and have her hair colored, there's an hour that's got to go into making that, actually applying that color and making it work, maybe more. But short of it is they can, if they were able to increase their product sales, it becomes a lot easier sales. So we look at that and think, all right, we know that we have to affect product sales. How do we do that? Well, in this instance, stylists are terribly afraid of coming across salesy, and they don't like to sell things. They just like hair. So what we come up with is a strategy where we said, all right, let's get 2 samples of hair and from the same person. One sample we will color, well, both samples will color. One we'll get the cheapest shampoo we can find at the grocery store. We'll wash it 100 times. The other sample we'll take and we will wash it 100 times, but with our salon quality hair, with our salon quality shampoo, and we'll compare the difference. What we're trying to do is we understand that product sales have to happen. We understand that the people who are primarily responsible for selling it are very afraid of coming across like a very salesy. So we simply give them these 2 strands of hair with our little experiment and put that in a place where it makes it easy, very easy for them to be able to demonstrate that to their clients. And if you can see if there's a significant difference, it's easy to say, you just spent $100+ in getting your hair colored. You might want to consider this $20 shampoo to keep it longer so you don't have to come back here sooner. Which took all the pressure off of that. Now, when we went back and looked at their service revenue is comprised of both new customers and repeat customers. So we went to that 3rd tier, if you're still following this example, and we realized that they had a 30% retention ratio of clients coming back on a continual basis. And now all of a sudden we know, okay, we've got 2 data points between product sales and attrition or repeat business, the flip side of attrition. And we know that we need to affect these 2 things. Now you think about that, where I started with the preliminary question about how do I grow a business if I'm a hair salon? It's much easier to solve attrition and product sales than it is just having an open canvas and going after whatever creative idea that you can think of. These 2 things are much more palatable, much more easier to affect. And short of it is, we said, okay, what we've got to do to improve our attrition rate is we have to make sure that people who come into the salon are not solely loyal to one solo stylist. We've got to make sure that more people are contributing to their process and that we're getting it right, and a few other operational things to make sure that they keep coming back. And they're far easier problems to solve and far more palatable than simply looking at everything under the sun and trying to implement those. And it was simply done by identifying our key performance indicators and breaking them down 2 and sometimes 3 levels to understand the numbers behind it. Short of it is by implementing a few things to improve customer retention. Within a few months, they were already at significantly high revenue, and they maintained that significantly high revenue for 6 out of the next 8 months, which was well beyond the duration of my engagement with them. That's the long of understanding your key performance indicators and how you break those down 2 or 3 different levels, sometimes 4 or 5. But every time we go through this exercise with our clients, we always find some bottleneck or some issue. And in doing that, it makes our marketing problems a lot easier to solve rather than just taking a broad brush and going after whichever marketing idea we think might work. After you break down your key performance indicators, the next thing you want to look at is your customer mindset. I talked about this earlier when I mentioned the medical billing company that we had done some work with, where they were previously putting out features lists of their software. In doing a brief survey of a dozen or so of their clients, we find out that all of them are saying we care about customer service. All of a sudden, we know what we need to be talking about. We know what our messaging strategy needs to be. And consequently, we can be a lot more creative in how we message it and what we do with them if we know that customer service is the primary concern of their primary audience. Now, most organizations, when they think about their audience, have multiple audiences that they need to be communicating with and whose thinking they need to affect. If you can do this in each and every one of your audiences, it becomes very clear to you how you need to communicate with them and which messages you need to be saying in such that you're not just taking a stab in the dark. You can also identify which items or benefits of your product, service, or message are salient and which are not. Again, going back to the customer service example. A client, prior to us understanding the client mindset, had not talked about customer service in anything that they were doing. Now that we understand that, everything should be about customer service, which, if you think about our earlier problem about tools and strategy and what I mentioned as being the content void, that content void is easily solved because now you know that, at least with this company, everything has to be about customer service. And that's where they hang their hat on. Finally, if you look at your competition, and I'm not just saying what do they offer, but you got to think about how are they trying to influence the purchasing decisions or the mindset or the actions of our competing audiences or the audiences for which we are competing. Then you can start to understand how you can compete differently than them and what messages that you can say that will stand out and be salient in driving the behavior of your target audience. So if you are able to go through this simple analysis, where you're looking at your key performance indicators, you understand your customer mindset, and then you understand your competitive environment, so you know how you compete on different levels, you can begin to understand how you need to develop out your strategy. I might say one more thing on the competitive environment, is that you should be wise enough about your audience to think about it beyond just direct competitors. I have a client that is an association of landscape architects. We'll get into them more later. They don't have another association that's trying to get landscape architects to join. What they do have is a bunch of other associations which these landscape architects can join, and they also have, if you take that one step further, any other way, they have competitors in that any other way that their target audience could spend their money instead of spending it on a membership with them, or even their sponsorship dollars from sponsors, those could be spent a million different ways. Any of that could be considered competition, and understanding how you stack up is critical so that you know what your messaging should be. When you've gone through this little analysis of understanding these three items, again being key performance indicators, your customer mindset, and then your competitive environment, then you're ready to move on to the next step, which is in the process of measure, create, effect. Now we're getting into the create section, where we can start to develop out a strategy that will drive our usage of any of our other marketing efforts. Not only will it drive the messaging, but it'll also help you identify which marketing tools you should implement. I talked earlier about the large construction company that's talking about using Facebook. You would go through this little bit of analysis. They look and say, hey, these are our customers. We know where they are. Therefore, Facebook should not be on the table, because nobody on Facebook is talking about government contracts about building a dam. I should qualify that's my assumption, but, which would need to be validated, but you get the point. That is that you understand these things, you know exactly what you need to do, similar to how the medical device company, the medical billings company needed to talk about customer service. You understand your audience, you understand the tools that you need to use, where to reach and engage them, whether that's a trade show, whether that's via PR, direct marketing. There are a whole host of different tools that you can implement, and that's a conversation for another day as to how to implement each one of those. But you start to get a more comprehensive idea as to what to use and how to use those as you develop out not only your strategy, but you can develop out your messaging, your collateral, and whatnot. Let's move on then to the third step of the solution, which is effect. Meaning, how do we affect behavior or affect the way people think about our important message that I've been referring to? And how do we measure that? So once you've already gone through and established what your key performance indicators are, you can execute campaigns. And if you take that one step further and you monitor your sales process for each step, it becomes pretty easy to watch your transitions from one step to the next and monitor how that happens. So for example, if the first entry point or the first touch point that a customer has with your brand is the website, how many people visit the website, and then you compare that to how many people go to the next level, which is they fill out a form or they give us a call or whatever that sales process works for you, and you can begin to monitor how effective each one of your marketing tools is as it influences that sales process. When you do that, you can implement something as simple as a brochure and watch how it changes or does not change your percentages as you move through the various steps in the marketing process. Now, to do this, there's sophisticated software systems that you can purchase if that's right for your company, and if not, you can also monitor this using a spreadsheet. It does not have to be a very labor-intensive thing to do. But it is something that if you monitor it, you'll see why in the previous study I cited from C&G and Chadwick Bailey, how 98% of those companies were gaining market share. Well, because they're monitoring that and they're learning things from watching those processes as they go about their marketing efforts. By implementing those learnings, they're able to improve their marketing performance by simply making tweaks to their system and improving that over time. Now, that being said, let me give you a couple of case studies. Let's move on to people or companies that have been successful in implementing this type of a process. We're going to start with a national brand, the division of Coca-Cola, and then we'll move on to a local company that I've had dealings with over the past year with whom we've been able to successfully implement this measure, create, effect strategy. So we'll first talk about Honest Tea. Now, of course, everybody knows about the beverage industry. It's highly competitive. There are loads of different alternatives, a very mature marketplace, and which means that you have to approach your marketing slightly different. We can talk about the different phases of the product life cycle and the growth and maturity of different industries in another session or on another day. But the short of it is that it's very difficult to enter a marketplace that's very well established and highly competitive. Honest Tea, again being Coca-Cola, goes out and rather than just saying, hey, let's launch a new brand of soft drink, they go through their analysis and determine that because of certain trends within the marketplace of people calorie counting and looking at ingredients and trying to avoid artificial preservatives and flavoring, that let's make what they call an honest drink. So they title the drink Honest Tea. And this whole notion of being honest in their ingredients is just drowned out, or I shouldn't say drowned, but it is a core value of this entire brand, which is pretty impressive. So what they decided to do is rather than just buying a bunch of ads, they said, based off of this notion of being about honest ingredients, let's go out to metro areas throughout the country and let's test their honesty. So they set up kiosks. If you'll go to the next slide, I've got a picture of one. In various areas throughout the country, and they set up this kiosk and basically said, here are drinks, they're $1, but you're on the honor system as to whether or not you pay for it. And then they would measure who paid for it and who didn't. There was no penalty if you took the drink and didn't pay for it. They just watched you. What they did with this data is they compiled what they called the honesty index. If you'll go to the next slide, you'll see here is one thing that they did with it, where they would publish infographics about the most honest places and who was honest versus male versus female, and they allowed people to compare different groups. So you could say, blonde women, how do blonde women compare in terms of their honesty with bald guys that wear glasses and have a beard? And they had all sorts of fun with it. And they put out press releases ranking the most honest cities As a side note, Salt Lake City was in the top 5 of the most honest cities, and here you can see the least honest was Providence, Rhode Island. In terms, of course, they're having fun with it. But the short of it is their ability to do this and to enter the marketplace, a highly competitive marketplace at that, allowed them to gain significant market share. I haven't yet to be able to find data on how they compete with other soft drinks, but if you pay attention, every year they put out a new honesty index, and every year publications throughout the country publish it, particularly if you get a favorable response. They've gotten the advertising equivalent of millions of dollars worth of publicity simply by having fun with the brand and publishing their marketing data, or their data on who's honest and who's not, and getting loads and loads of exposure based off of just publishing those findings. Again, all based off of their ability to understand their audience, understand industry and competition, develop a strategy that's bounded creativity, very creative, yet still within the confines of how they're going to be successful. And they've been able to successfully launch a product into a highly, again, competitive marketplace. Now let's look at a smaller example that's not a Coca-Cola. That is the American Society, or the Utah chapter, I should say, of the American Society of Landscape Architects. This is a small organization that has about a dozen people that are volunteers on its board, and they have one part-time employee, and this is a local society, the trade organization for landscape architects. They needed to improve the revenue generated through sponsorship and membership. And prior to engaging in this process, the way they were thinking about their audience is, hey, let's try to get some sponsors to give us some money, and let's get people to join us. And they would provide continuing education opportunities for the licensed landscape architects. And among those landscape architects, they were primarily known as the place where you go to their event when you wanted to get some credits that you needed to get to maintain your licensure. What we started to do was go through this process of measure, create, effect with them, where they understood their audiences better. They looked at the value that they provide both their membership as well as their sponsors, and started to realize that, hey, rather than just looking at these people like we're providing continuing education, or we just want a sponsorship and we'll give you a booth at one of our events, we started to look at this as, hey, we have a resource to which we can control access. If we can control access to that, we can influence things, and we have more value that we can provide to our sponsors and to our members. And so just beginning with this year, they've revamped their sponsorship package to more closely reflect this revised notion of, let's view our value as providing a resource or access to this very niche community. And if we go to the next slide, this just demonstrates a small portion of their sponsorship package, where understanding this, again, drove the marketing process. So they realized that rather than putting out a PDF that had a bulleted points of the things you get for your sponsorship, they started to treat it like a resource and saying, here are all the opportunities that we give our sponsors to engage with this resource and grow their business through proper engagement with a very captive audience. And so we started to revamp the sponsorship package. And not that the specifics are relevant to any of you, but the process is in terms of how you think about it, how you approach it. And then what you'll see is here on the slide that shows the sponsorship package is that their revenue in sponsorship just in the first quarter alone is already up 15, actually I found out yesterday, it's almost 20% just in the first quarter. And that their they've got their annual event coming up actually tomorrow, but their attendees at that event are up 50%. So just in the first quarter, they're starting to see some really quick dividends paid by simply thinking about their marketing efforts the right way. Now, as our time is just about spent, and I know we've got to get to a couple of questions, let me just sum up by saying We've talked about problems with tools versus strategy, about the inability to measure and monitor marketing performance, as well as unbounded creativity. If you can think about it as a process of measuring both your key performance indicators, your audience and competitive environment, then creating a marketing strategy to form the functions as a plan to drive your audience's behavior or even the way they think about you, you can come up with far more creative solutions. And then if you implement effect, you can actually watch how your key performance indicators increase. So with that being said, let's take a few minutes and let's move into questions, unless you have something else you'd like to add before we move into that, Scott.
You know, I know we've had a couple of questions submitted already. So Kim, if you'll get ready with those questions. I just want to say here, however, Nate, you have been remarkably thorough. At Griffin Hill, we have a huge bias for good science and good research. And I am just really pleased at the way you've organized your thought process to be able to talk about these three pitfalls, but to dive into examples and research-based information. It just elevates our capacity to make good decisions and to act on it. Nate, I just have to applaud you for your great preparation and your thoughtful work and your remarkable presentation. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have you with us in the webinar.
Thank you very much.
Kim, I know you've got a question or two.
Yes, submitted by Clayton Berg, General Manager. What's your take on purchasing a domain name for a few grand? My company doesn't do a lot on the internet as far as sales are concerned, but a good website name like that costs $2,000. Which is a better option than the one we currently have?
It's a good question, and I have several clients right now that are presently dealing with that issue. And my take is that it depends on a few factors. First of all, what is the nature of your business? If it is an online, if it's primarily online, then it can absolutely be worth it. I think that a lot of companies that tend to do this, I view it as extortion, and that it should be illegal. My father has a small nursery up in the Ogden area, and they've had people who registered their domain 10 years ago who are just hanging on to it, waiting for them to pay $2,000 to get it, because anyway, his company is Gibby Floral, and they've registered gibbyfloral.com. They have absolutely nothing to do with what his business is. Now, other than me spewing out that I think it should be illegal, that doesn't solve the problems when it comes to someone else having it. And there could be legitimate reasons for having it. But if your business primarily is not driven by the internet, it's generally an investment that I think is going to be really tough to recoup. There are enough derivations of that name that can be overcome in time if you were to use one of those derivations, that it's a very rare instance in which I recommend any of our clients actually pay that money. I'm going
to jump in here with a perfect example. I love your guidance here on this question. I was noticing, I am not a follower, but I happened to notice on a news feed the other day that Donald Trump's Twitter handle is real Donald Trump. For that very reason, somebody else besides Donald Trump has Donald Trump. And so he has to come up with a derivation that makes it work for him, or pay the hostage price. Look, you can get a hold of and reach out to and contact Nate Gibby at Nate. Tell them all the ways they can get you.
Sure. My company is called Serfwerks, spelled Serfwerks. Got to mind the spelling. So Serfwerks.com online. Twitter handle is @Serfwerks. We're easy to find. Happy to speak with anybody. Thank you.
I love it. Please reach out, connect with Nate Gibby and Serfwerks. And what a delightful play on words with Serfwerks. I love it. You can also, you're going to want to be at SMARTcon in the upcoming year. Make sure you block out, I think it's September. Kim, jump in here and make sure I get this right. Is it the 27th?
It's Thursday, September 28 at the Utah Valley Convention Center.
Okay, so block that date. Make sure that you've saved the date and that you're ready for SMARTcon. You get this kind of instruction, the best and the brightest available in sales, marketing, and the technologies that drive them both. We're pleased to have Nate Gibby with us today. We're pleased to have a good working relationship with you, Nate. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. My pleasure. Sure appreciate Griffin Hill, all of your efforts. I was at SMARTcon last year, and there was a lot of great, valuable content. So look forward to it again this year.
It's a pretty energetic marketplace, isn't it?
Indeed.
Yeah, it's a great place to be. Hey, thanks for joining us all today. Take care. We'll see you next time on our Webinar to Win series. Take care. Bye-bye.